Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts as they share with you the insider's guide to property investing.
All right, folks, welcome back. We've got with us today on the couch the property professor, Peter Koulizos. I always struggle with
2 out of 2, you're going well, Bryce.
Peter Koulizos. If this guy has more degrees than a thermometer, but he's decided to embark in a project right now, which is a thesis around gentrification.
Yep.
And I think there's lots that we can talk about for the benefit of our listeners. Yeah. So how's the thesis going, and what's the insights from the thesis?
So this is my second master's, because I already got a Master of Business in Property.
So I told you, folks.
And a graduate diploma in property.
That's why we got them on. We only get the best on the property couch.
And a teaching degree.
Yeah.
But this is a Master of Urban and Regional Planning, because I'm particularly interested in property development. I don't want to be a town planner, because I love teaching property, but because I develop myself. If the only thing it does is make me a better property developer, then it's been well worth it. But gentrification is something that has intrigued me for many years, hence the first book that I wrote on top Australian suburbs. Many of those suburbs are based on where they are in the gentrification cycle.
Spectrum, yep.
So, we've got inner city suburbs of Melbourne like Yarraville and Seddon and Footscray, and in Sydney we've got Newtown and Erskineville, and Adelaide we've got Torrensville and Cowndilla, and I could go on. But for me, because I lived up because I was brought up in an area that originally nobody wanted to live in, only the recently arrived Greek and Italian migrants lived there.
Yep.
But then over time, they moved out or they died off, and now you've got young white professionals moving in. Property prices have gone up and rents have gone up, and that has happened all around Australia. So when I was doing the research for the book, I actually went and visited every suburb that I've written about, and more so because there were more than 107 in the end that I looked at, but only 107 made the book. So. And I found very similar things, whether it was in Balmain and Paddington in Sydney or Richmond and St Kilda in Melbourne, very similar things. The areas may have been blue collar, full of crime, nobody wanted to live there, but generally because of its proximity to the city or its proximity to the sea, it was found attractive by people that were making more money, generally those working in the city, and property prices and rents have gone up.
Gentrification in Brisbane, is that the same?
Yeah, West End in Brisbane is a classic, and I can see the Redcliffe Peninsula going through a gentrification process. There are a couple of key indicators. If we look at Redcliffe in Brisbane, you've got brand new apartments, which we wouldn't invest in, but they're there.
Yep.
And then down the street, we've got these old 1950s and 60s houses. If you were in Redcliffe 10 years ago, nickname was Deadcliffe.
Yeah.
God's waiting room.
Next to Depression Bay.
Yeah. But one of the keys that I look for in an area is the main shopping strip. And I love going to Redcliffe whenever I go to Brisbane. I usually hop on the train out to Sandgate and then catch the bus out there if I haven't hired a car. And the main shopping strip has very few for lease or for sale signs. For me, that's a sign that the local economy is doing quite well. So the process for gentrification is basically the same in Australia. Gentrification happens all over the world, by the way, because the research that I'm doing at the moment, I'm using literature from all over the world, in particular Western countries like the US and the UK, but it's the same thing. It's old rundown areas close to the city and in some places close to the water. The gentry, that's where the word gentrification comes from, so richer people move in, generally because their work is nearby in the CBD, and generally if you work in the CBD, you're a white-collar worker, you earn more money than the people that used to live there and were blue-collar workers. So people are willing to spend money to fix up the properties. Property value goes up, property rents go up. So it's a great opportunity. If you can do your research properly and you can buy into an area that you think is gentrifying, you can make some very good money.
And it happens in the biggest cities in the world.
Yeah.
20 years ago, there was areas around the Brooklyn Bridge and area like Soho, which were old, vacant warehouses that were used by the homeless. And then you start to see these sort of modern, hip youngsters who are making their way in New York in fashion, art, and those types of things, create that environment, and then all of a sudden it becomes groovy. And then the money comes from the developers. They build that infrastructure. So whoever got in and were watching those new shops and craft shops and where it was happening from a fashion point of view, that's one of the great ones in terms of gentrification in big cities. And we know that happens in great areas of London and those types of things as well. So we're no different. You know, westernised civilisations, we're status driven, so this is that human interest, human behaviour stuff that we've talked about, where it's about following that lead. And so young architects trying to make their way, trying to get an old sort of blank canvas and trying to do that type of work does make those areas groovy.
Yeah, the creative class is certainly an indicator of gentrification.
Creative class, I like that statement. Have you got a licence on that one? Have you trademarked?
No, somebody else has used that.
The bohemian lifestyle. But so besides that creative culture, is there any other key signs you look for early?
Yep. Look for areas where people are willing to spend their money to fix up the properties. Mm-hmm. So I've talked about location, which is close to the city or the sea for gentrification, but also it needs to have historical homes. In Victoria, you call them period homes. In South Australia, we call them character homes. Basically, homes built before World War II. And this is the same in the US and in the UK. Well, the UK, they go centuries back.
Yeah, that's why I asked about Brisbane, because they don't necessarily have that.
No, but the key about West End was its proximity to the city.
Yeah.
But in Brisbane, they have their Queenslanders.
Yeah. So what does Redcliffe have? That's because it's still a bit further out.
Yeah. So
Sandgate has some.
Sandgate and Shorncliffe.
I do like going out to Sandgate. It's a great little pocket. I mean, the fact that you've got to go that final bit to Redcliffe, I actually like Sandgate because it's on the rail line and it's one of those sleepers. It's been a sleeper for 5 years. I think people have found it though.
Sandgate is in my book, just as many of the suburbs on the Redcliffe Peninsula. But the other, if we fast track a number of decades, there's a new rail link going on to that Redcliffe Peninsula, so that'll also help as well.
Yeah. But that's been coming for 25 years. That's what the real estate agents 25 years ago were saying. There's going to be a rail line. They did eventually fix the bridge.
Yeah, they
put
did.
A second bridge in. That helped.
But historical homes are also the key. So if you can find pockets close to your CBD that have historical homes that may look a bit run down now, but you see small BMWs, small Audis, so the aspirational class moving in, that's a good sign. If you see the large Mercs and the large Audis, that's too late. Mm-hmm. That's already gone up. But if you see the aspirational class there, and they're the ones that are at the local grungy cafe on the Saturday or Sunday morning, not reading the Fin Review, but generally on their phones, on Facebook or Twitter or whatever young people are doing. Whatever the hipsters are doing these days.
With the bugaboo prams, the really expensive prams to go with the really expensive aspirational car. Oh, very good. I guess when you researched the book, you said that you physically walked into every single suburb. So you've talked about for lease and for sale signs in the shopping centre. You've talked about gentrification. What else are you looking for when you're walking into these suburbs?
Ideally, Houseproud, which generally means a high proportion of owner-occupiers rather than renters. However, in an area with a high amount of flats and units and apartments, generally you find a lot more that are rented that are owned by people that live in them. So a lot of it is correlated with the type of product in the suburb. So if you have a lot of detached housing, it tends to be owner-occupied anyway.
So there's some examples of that, Peter, is Elwood in Melbourne, whereas traditionally Elwood's blue chip country, yet when you do the study on it, something like 65% of people are renting in that because of the density of that. The other classics are Bondi in Sydney. Yep. So you see almost 70% of all stock in Sydney and Bondi is rental property, but that's because the cluster of it is obviously apartments. So they would be exceptions to the rule, whereas as you're talking about before, when you get that 70-30, which is traditional mix, that's what you're looking for in these new areas that haven't had that I suppose, stock arrive, that big development going through, the big subdivisions and that medium and high density stuff arrive yet.
Yeah. So this is the sort of stuff that I've talked about so far is generally market driven or consumer driven, but there are other indicators. So where the public money is being spent? So is the state government putting in new infrastructure in the area? Is the local government beautifying the main retail strip? If it's on the coast, are they beautifying the esplanade? Is state or federal government putting in money with major road or rail infrastructure or a new hospital or a university? All of these things, or many of these things, will attract more people. So the more demand in an area, generally property prices and property rents will go up. So it's where's the private money going? So not just people fixing up their houses, but your developer splitting a block into 2 or 3 or 4 or 10. So they're confident. Where are the supermarkets being renovated and extended? So, the Coles and the Woolies of this world, or the IGAs have done their research to work out, yes, we need to invest our money here because the population is growing, or the incomes of the people that are here are growing, so this is a good spot to do our investment. So there are a lot of little indicators that you can look at, and not all the boxes have to be ticked. Like I was saying to Ben before, the creative class is one indicator, but it doesn't mean you need the creative class to go in there before gentrification occurs. Yeah. It might happen for other reasons. But there's lots of little indicators that you can look for.
What about obvious signs? When you walk into an area or suburb, there's obvious stuff that puts you off, teens congregating. Are there any non-obvious things that the untrained eye wouldn't notice as you walk through a suburb that maybe we can get some insights?
Look, if you're driving through a suburb, you may not notice.
You get shot at?
That'll work.
Driving the windows up. You may not notice the smells in the area or the sounds. So I like to walk through suburbs, or if I can get a bike, I'll ride through a suburb. So what sounds are you hearing? Is it AC/DC up really loud, or is it more modern music? Is it some international music, some Chinese music, some Indian music? Gives you an idea of the people living there. The smells. Is there a burnt metal smell, or is there a wastewater plant nearby?
Or a dog cannery that's cooking up all the pale dog food that just wafts over the suburb.
That's right.
Yeah, my sister lives in Spearwood over in Perth, and they had the small goods factory nearby. Yeah. And it was, the Fremantle doctor comes in at the wrong time, and you would get smashed by the smell of that. That's no longer an issue, but that's the type of thing you're talking about.
Yeah. And also the stuff that's not obvious is the stats. I'm a big fan of ABS stats, and I look at things like, is the income in this area rising faster than the state or national average?
Beautiful.
Is the percentage of professionals in the area increasing faster than the state or national average? And professionals, like the increase in professionals, is a worldwide indicator. But I'm not saying that I've made a major discovery, but I'll know more in a month's time. It seems to me the percentage of female professionals are having a much bigger impact than just professionals. Yeah. So I'll know more in a month's time once my paper is finished.
Roll those correlations and regression analysis, Pete. Get that regression analysis happening. You might be onto something there.
Yeah. So that's looking really
first
good.
Here on the property couch.
The other one is an ABS stat is usual place of residence, which basically means how many people are here now that were not here 5 years ago. And in gentrifying areas, that is relatively high compared to the state or national average. So these are little things that you can do. Again, more boxes that you can tick that say maybe this area is gentrifying. So proximity to the city or the sea, historical homes, look at the demographics, and a lot of that will be ABS stats, but also observation, like you said. If I'm walking down the street on a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock, is it teenagers walking the streets, or is it mums pushing those expensive prams, or young women in their gym gear going for a run or for a walk? That gives you an idea of the sort of people that live in an area.
And Pete, is there any time frame you give these areas? Are you of the view that it's, give it 2 years, give it 3 years, or are you trying to refine that to, no, I'm on it now, and it's going to happen over the course of the next couple of years? Like there's some examples where you buy in and 5 years and then it happens, as opposed to, trying to get in now. Have you got any views on that?
Gentrification takes decades.
Yep.
So it's not like if you don't get in this year, it's not like it's a hot spot and it's only going to be a hot spot for this month or this year.
Yep.
And it's very hard. I mean, the risk is trying to pick areas before they gentrify, because they may not gentrify. Just because an area, like one of the other indicators I look at is not just the median price, lower than surrounding suburbs, but house for house. So if I find a bungalow in this cheaper suburb, is a bungalow in the more expensive suburb, is that more expensive rather than just median price? Because median price can be distorted by new products coming on, by limited number of properties selling. So one thing I look at is the median price of properties to give me an indication as to whether this area might gentrify. But if the price is really low because it's a dog cannery or there's a oil refinery,
Or flight path.
it's probably always going to stay low.
Yep.
So you need to stay away from it there. But where you see in what used to be industrial areas, let's say Richmond in Melbourne, and now industry is moving out because the land is worth more as residential land rather than as commercial land. That's what you want to look for, or where houses are being converted. And there's a great example of those in, say, Collingwood and Abbotsford, where they had warehouses, or they've got warehouses where they used to produce clothes, and now they're apartments. So lots of different things to look for.
Is part of your paper looking to see if there's any, if it's finite for gentrification? Because if you think about it, it's not as if this stuff is new. If you think about even the west of Melbourne, you go as far out as Sunshine, next suburb across, no period homes. So you're going to run out eventually of new gentrification. So will the definition change?
No, well, generally the older style homes were built first, and they tend to be built close to the CBD or close to the port of a major capital city. So you're right. When you go out into areas where the majority of housing is post-World War II, I mean, I don't know of any area in Australia. There might be, because I haven't been to every suburb in Australia. I've just been to the top.
We don't believe that.
But I haven't found a suburb that is predominantly post-war housing that is or has gentrified. Now, if any of the listeners find one, if you want to email me, please let me know. I'm happy to do the research. But around the world, including Australia, historical homes is one of the keys.
Scarcity.
Yeah. And you don't have to buy the historical home. Like if you're going to buy in Elwood, you don't have to buy the Californian bungalow or the Edwardian villa. You can buy the 70s unit next door.
And
that's
wave
okay.
ride.
Yep.
We always talk about being a price taker, not a price maker. So all you need to do, that's dovetailing nicely into what you just said there. I think the overarching principles here are consistent with the principles that we've been talking about, Ben. Is it's largely about location doing 80% of the heavy lifting and understanding. Because I was talking to a client yesterday, and I said, look, owner-occupied purchases is all about bricks and mortar. Investing purchases is all about finance. Because if we understand what makes the finance tick, which is understanding the people who are getting more incomes, which is understanding the numbers that you're talking about, it's all derivatives of income. If we understand that, we get this science better, and it's dovetailing in nicely to a lot of the principles that we've been talking about. That it's location and where is the money going, because that's what the banks. Because most people in this country aren't blessed with cash to buy real estate; they've got to borrow. So if we don't understand what the banks process and how they lend, you're going back to you're just doing searching, not researching.
Correct. And so, Pete, we've talked a lot about gentrifying areas. What about blue chip country? What's your view on blue chip country?
Yeah, look, if you can afford to get into a blue chip suburb like Toorak, like Bondi, like Mossman, like Burnside and Adelaide, good luck to you. The reality is you probably won't be able to buy a detached house, but that's okay. You buy a unit, because a small property in a good location is much better than a big property in a poor location. Because as I said earlier, you can never change location.
That's right. And I suppose for those people who are, might be very high net worth doctors and that who are listening to the podcast as well, they might have $10,000 in surplus income per month in their household. And that's a lot of money coming in. So $1 million purchase in that area, when that property more than likely has averaged a 9 or 10% compounding return, they're going to get their money back in 8 or 9 years in terms of double their money. Now, do they need the big income that comes with the rent? No. They can support that. So it's good to know that we're on the same page around, blue chip country is blue chip country, and it will always stay that. We don't make any more of it. The people who are normally in there control the planning guidelines that go on in there.
Because planning, one thing I've learnt in this Masters is planning is a very political process. The professionals, the town planners that work for council will have one idea, but the elected members have a different idea because their constituents are saying, we don't want townhouses here, we don't want apartments here.
Are you telling me, Pete, that there might be some donations that are going to political parties? Is that what you say?
Actually, after the
I
term,
just saw his arms crossed. I'm not sure that's what he's saying.
after the term break, I've actually got a very brave person coming in from the development industry talking to my property students about lobbying.
Yes. Well, now, if you saw last night's episode of Utopia...
Oh, I missed it because I had a class last night, but I got to watch it on iView. I love it. I love it.
It's gold.
It's a classic, isn't it?
Gold.
Yeah.
It is very, very good.
There we go, folks. It's clearly I'm missing out, so I don't even know what Utopia is. So I'm writing down, going to iView and checking.
ABC. It's the working dog, comedy, and it's a spoof on this MBN or no, what's an MBN? It's the Nation Building MBA or whatever.
Nation Building Authority.
And it's a political commentator who comes down and tries to influence the subdivision for developers, and these developers just, here's a bottle of Grange, and here's the tickets to the races, here's the tickets to the Grand Prix, here's the box at the footy. Oh no, it doesn't go on at all. It was very good.
If we could plug another TV show.
Oh, please do.
Hipsters.
Oh.
Hipsters on SBS, because hipsters may be, I don't know for sure yet, but hipsters may be a new indicator of gentrification.
Oh.
Those that ride their fixed gear bikes and have the paleo diet and they have
nothing wrong with the paleo
diet. No, and they're organically ground coffee beans. It's been. I won't go into that.
But isn't that discriminatory? Because not everyone can grow one of those really
those Ned Kelly beards, aren't they beautiful?
Hey, well, I was reading one of those UK magazines, and the hipster's dead. So who knows whether that's right or not. There was an article or an essay probably about 4 weeks ago where it says the hipsters... I didn't even know what a hipster was until about 6 months ago. I was just calling in the Ned Kellys. There's another Ned.
Yeah. Or the women.
And here we are thinking Ben's a hipster. I've got to change that definition.
Well, I am going to say that, and I haven't put this out to you yet, but we're coming up to Movember. So I reckon we should do Movember and raise money for men's health issues.
Yeah.
I think that would be good. So keep an ear out for that one. We might start to grow a moustache over November.
I've had
Movember every month
for 40 years. So good.
Yeah, you're good. We're just going to follow your lead.
Yeah, we don't know how much money you've raised. Now, there's an interesting thing that you've got involved in Adelaide, Poppy. Can you tell the listeners a bit more about Poppy?
Poppy stands for Property Options for Pensioners and Investors. So many of the listeners would have heard of options, how a property investor or a developer will pay an option to someone, often a farmer who lives on the fringe of the city, and the developers will say, look, I'll buy your place for $1 million if I can get planning approval to subdivide it, but for your trouble, I'll give you $100,000. So the developer hands over $100,000. They're busy working with council, lobbying council to try and change the zoning. And if the developer is able to change it from rural to residential, the property might go from $1 million to $3 million. So the $100,000 that was spent was well worth it.
Yep.
If it doesn't, well, that's just the cost of doing business.
Yep.
So what I've done is I've put an option on a pensioner's property. So the home is in Unley Park. So Unley Park is like Toorak in Melbourne or like Mosman in Sydney.
Beautiful.
And it's a character home. So the pensioners, as the name suggests, they're on the pension, so they're not making a lot of money. And I've paid them an option to buy their house at whatever the price was in 2013 at some time in the future, and I'm paying the pensioners a monthly option fee. The monthly option fee is a game changer for them, because you can imagine somebody on a pension and now I'm giving them an option fee which is about 70% on top of their pension, and the money that I'm giving them doesn't affect their pension. So you just imagine if somebody was to increase your income by 70%, how would that change your life? So for them, they're loving it. the system has been worked out as if I was to buy that property as an investment, what would my cash flow be over a 25-year period? So generally speaking, I would be heavily negatively geared at the beginning, but heavily positively geared at the end of 25 years. But what they've done is they've levelled out the payments so they stay the same. So these pensioners keep getting money for up to 25 years. So they're loving it and I'm loving it. And one of the reasons is, and it might sound silly, but as a person who's invested in property for a long time, I don't have an extra tenant because they own the property. They still own it. I just have an option to buy it. So if the hot water system breaks down, that's not my problem. You own it. You need to fix it up. I don't have any council rates. I don't have any water rates. I don't pay any land tax because I don't actually own the property. So I get all the capital growth because I hope they live a very long life. So I get all that capital growth in 5 or 10 or 20 years and none of the traditional heartache that a property investor goes through. Yes, I've paid an option fee for it, but it's just like when you borrow money to buy a property, after 25 years, the interest that you've paid is nothing compared to, hopefully, the capital growth that you've scored over 20 years.
And listeners, that's a really good point because Peter is an ethical investor. Okay, there are businesses out there that buy houses and promote themselves for buying houses and try and do vendor terms or try and get lower socio-demographic people into buying houses on really strict contracts, and if they breach that contract, all of the rent that they've been paying to try and own that house, so buy to own type concepts, we're not happy about that from a PIPA point of view. And so what Peter's talking about there is something that's ethical, it's something that's sensible, and it gives a good opportunity. So Peter, if they want to learn more about that, can we put something on our website to send them? So if you give us some information about that, they can go and have a look at that.
poppyaustralia.com.au.
Okay.
Started by one of my law lecturers that lectures for me in the property investment course and his business partner. And for me, the other thing that makes me happy about investing in the property is I'm helping a pensioner. It's not like I'm helping this farmer who's going to become a millionaire overnight.
Correct.
But here's some people that really need the money. Their family understands what's happening. Their family were not in a position to help out mum and dad. The family is happy to forego that capital growth for mum and dad to live a much better lifestyle for their remaining years.
So they were asset rich but cash flow poor. They get to stay in a suburb that's really familiar to them. And so I think it's a win-win.
Yeah.
So
they go to the same church, the same bowling club, their friends and family are nearby. Perfect.
So we'll put a link to that up on thepropertycouch.com.au. So head to thepropertycouch.com.au and we'll have that there for you. So Pete, we've covered off a fair bit today. We've talked about Adelaide, we've talked about gentrification, we've talked a lot about your golden rules, we've talked about Poppy, we talked about what you do when you walk into a suburb. Anything that we haven't covered today?
I think we've covered it all. I think investing can be hard, or it may seem hard. You don't need to be a genius to invest in property. You just need to know a little bit more than the next person. And you do that by researching, not just searching, but researching, surrounding yourself by people that know more than you that you can trust, just like qualified property investment advice.
Oh, mate.
Beautiful. You like that?
Beautiful plug.
Segue.
We love the professional plugs for the Peak Association, which is a non-for-profit association trying to improve the professionalism in our industry. Thank you, Peter.
There is one thing we haven't talked about.
What's that? The Crows?
This weekend, your tips.
Oh.
Freo versus Hawks? I'm a Freo supporter, so take it easy on me.
Freo.
Did I influence you?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
West Coast v North?
West Coast.
All right.
Because the sad thing is for you Victorians,
I'm not a Victorian, I'm a Western
I know, that's
Australian.
why I was looking at him. It's going to be an all Western Australian final in Melbourne next week.
Okay, well, let's see if that happens. And it would be interesting if it does, and I don't mind it.
I remember in 1991, I was living in Perth. West Coast made their first grand final against Hawthorn, and the streets were empty.
Yeah.
Every single person
that on
was
TV,
inside in front of it. So can you imagine what it's going to be like if that actually
So
happens?
it's good for the Melbourne economy.
Yeah.
Our hotels will be full.
But not this
Our bars
weekend.
will
There's
be full.
nobody here. They're all in Perth this weekend. Yeah.
Which is a good thing. All right, folks. So as per usual, if you could go to thepropertycouch.com.au, leave us a review. Let us know what you thought about the property professor. He's a good friend of ours. He's a good friend of the Property Couch. So we will have him on in future episodes. But let us know what you think. He's also got a couple of books that are available. The top Australian suburbs. We'll have a link to that on the Property Couch. We'll also have his Property versus Shares book as well. And we also might even put your Twitter handle up there. Peter, are you a tweeter?
I am. I don't know what my handle is, but if you search my name, you'll find me on Twitter.
We'll put Pete's details up there as well. And as per usual, if you follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, you'll certainly be able to find out first when these episodes are actually out. Now, this is the point every week where we lose a little bit of credibility because we sign off around the world. Ben?
Well, yeah, I try to.
And here's the deal.
Very
it's
unsuccessful.
always in a French accent, no matter where we go. So we're going to...
Sayonara in French, yeah.
So we're going to throw it over to you to say goodbye in Greek, and the challenge for you is to see if you can do it in a French accent. But if you don't want to, we can talk to all our Greek listeners. But it's been good having you on.
Yeah.
And we've got to do it
get you
more
on
often.
again.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. I'm keen, if I can, once I finish the paper, I might be able to reveal a few more indicators.
That'd be good.
Beautiful.
Well, there you go, folks. Until next week, Pete's about to sign off in Greek.
Yasu.
Yasu.
Yeah, so
See you, folks. See you next week.